Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Several weeks ago, I received an email from Marshall Kupchin, who was our principal of the religious school before David Schwartz. And he had seen an email that I had sent to the congregation. He made Aliyah right when he left here. It was a lifelong dream of his. And in the 7 to 8 years that he's been in Israel, seen 5 elections and COVID and October 7th and the war. And he'd read the email I'd sent and he wrote to me, Israel just needs a new vision, unshackled by politics, by which we can become a light unto the nations. A new vision. It just made me think of many things. It made me think of a discussion that I had 2 decades ago when I was working on one of the Camp Ramah Darom, for another Marshall, Rabbi Marshall Lisak. And it was Tisha B'Av afternoon, and we were talking about destruction and rebirth, and we were talking about Zionism. And he asked everybody, well, what does Zionism mean to you? This was 20 years ago, and it was including many Israelis. But I was thinking about it, and eventually what I said, my little contribution to this big discussion was, there was a Zionism 1.0. And Zionism 1.0 was to be a nation like all the other nations. Right? This is what the early Zionists talked about. That we know Zionism will be successful when there are Israeli thieves and Israeli prostitutes. Then we know that Zionism has done what it needs to do and reintegrated us to be a family of nations. We take it for granted, but in 1948, fragile state made up of refugees, couldn't take anything for granted, a traumatized nation. So just to have a marching band, a flag, a police force, just all the regular things of society, an army. But I said, now we have to have a Zionism 2.0, a Zionism that's filled with purpose, with spirit. We just didn't come back to our land after 2,000 years just to be like everybody else. And we talked about how even in those days, there were many Israelis who were going through a process of also seeking out, who were traveling all over the world after the army, and who were in their music. There were this whole phenomenon of Israeli mainstream rock artists suddenly discovering religion and spirituality and bringing it into their lyrics and into the charts. And it was East and West and Ashkenazi and Mizrahi and Sephardi and all the different things, and Hasidic and Kabbalistic and Eastern religion, all of it coming together. People searching, what does it mean where we are now? I remember even a few years even before then, I was in yeshiva and studying Talmud, endless hours of Talmud, and really seeing how deeply the Talmud comes out of the rabbi's angst at that moment, right after the destruction of the Second Temple, of what does it mean with no temple to be Jewish, and how so much of the Judaism we live comes out of that moment. And everything we live was constructed for exile. I remember approaching one of the head rabbis, who was the Mashkiach Ruchani, the spiritual advisor of the place. And he'd once, hearing all my comments in his Torah class, come up and whispered in my ear, I am also a contemplative. But he was very, very, very firmly Orthodox. And I shared with him, well, did God bring us back to the land just to do the same thing we've been doing for 2,000 years? And he thought for a moment and he said, I've heard others share the same view as you. And he said, I think, especially regarding agricultural mitzvot, we can't just go back to doing them the way they were done in biblical times. He was talking about the tithing of the produce and letting certain trees grow their produce after a certain amount of years. And I thought, that's not what I'm talking about exactly. So what does a new vision look like? What does a new vision look like? And back then, what I was on fire with was an idea of a Torah that is both open, and deep at the same time. Now we have this idea in Judaism that the more committed you become to Judaism, the deeper you go into your Judaism, the more narrow you have to become for that to be real. And the more religious, the more religious you become, suddenly it means you have to be more closed to others' views and other people. And that same teacher, who I respect very much, once was talking to a group of more liberal Jews, and he said, you know, some people are so open-minded, their minds fall out. But to me, deep was not only about connecting to Judaism, yes, having profound things to say about life, but it's also about a commitment to Judaism, that one can be both deeply committed spiritually, daily to this faith, and yet preserve an openness, a wide open openness to the world. And for me, that was Zionism 2.0. That was what Zionism had to be about, both profoundly spiritual and connected to everything we've been for 4,000 years, at the same time open to all faiths and people, the world, the future. As Rav Kook said, bringing the ancient into the new and the new into the ancient. And so this Tisha B'Av afternoon, and every Tisha B'Av afternoon, we switch from the sorrow of loss. We start to turn to the power of consolation and rebirth, to the tender heart, to healing. And the greatest healing truly comes when we find a new vision. When we're broken and we're shattered, we only really begin to repair when we start to see the world in a new way again. And these 7 weeks are really about trying to find a vision. And it coincides with what we read in the Torah, the Shema, our timeless declaration of our faith, affirmation of our faith, and really an affirmation of the unity of all life and the love that binds all of it together. And from that unity is where we keep renewing and finding new vision and new ways to keep us going forward. No accident the rabbis made the Shema the center point of the Judaism they built after the destruction. And as the Rabbi says, even the Torah, we reread this morning, the receiving of the Torah, but as we say in so many different places, even in the very blessings for an Aliyah, we say, God, not who gave the Torah, but who gives the Torah. We're always receiving the Torah. And as the Ari says, the Torah isn't just these scrolls we have in our ark. Those scrolls were just what our ancestors were able to receive 3,500 years ago. But the real Torah is the heavenly Torah, the supernal Torah is beyond all things. And we keep receiving from that. We keep bringing new vision into our life, new Torah. And sometimes you have to go through that terrible destruction to really receive the new vision. Everything has to be torn apart to find a new direction. So what is that new Torah, the new vision that we have to receive right now in this moment of such difficulty for our people, for Israel? So I still think it's that Torah that's open and wide and deep, that's possible. And also a Torah and life of prayer that is connected to the ancient, but also is looking forward to how to ever be more part of the family of nations and peoples. And it has to be a Torah that can guide us for the next 2,000 years, has new ideas, and applies as much to smartphones as it does to everything we read about every week in our Torah. It has to be a Torah that can transform us where we are right now, bring us something new. And maybe above all, today being Shabbat Nachamu, but also Tu B'Av, it has to be a Torah of love. Because love is that expression of the expansiveness of the divine. When we feel love, we feel free, we have no bounds, we have wings, we can do anything. We need to have that love for each other and for all humanity, and to take that incredible creativity that came with our rebirth in Israel, the power of that 2,000 years of wisdom gathered, of mind ability and the creativity of a small nation in terrible circumstances, and take that creativity and bring it into the world, even more than we are now. A love that embraces all. and that Torah that embraces both the wisdom that we learned through exile and the power of our ancient homeland. In the end, nobody really knows what that new vision will look like, because a new Torah is not a new Torah if you already know what's in it. And it would not be that new Torah if we already knew, well, I know exactly this is what it's going to be. We can only hope and pray that through all this that we're going through these few years, the shattering, the brokenness, what's revealing within ourselves, that something new will emerge, and that will be what will carry us into the future. That we didn't come back to the land after 2,000 years just to continue doing what we were doing right before, or to live like the nobles of Poland 300 years ago. And in fact, the world is refusing to let us do that, to be just as we used to be. And so maybe the greatest comfort is to know that we're only beginning to discover what it means to be who we are in this new vision. And it applies to us here too in the diaspora. Who are we meant to be? How do we connect to all of it? On this Shabbat, Nachamu, as we face such deep turmoil and challenge, we pray that that new tender vision will open up speedily in our days. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom.